Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we are going to be going over Unit 2, Lesson 2, and this is going to be the concept of continental drift. So as always, you should have downloaded your interactive notebook pages for the day, and this lesson will coincide with those guided notes. So yesterday we learned about the different layers of the Earth kind of as our starting point for plate tectonics. And as we go on in this unit, what we're going to find is that the Earth isn't stagnant, meaning that it doesn't just stay still. Our continental plates and our oceanic plates, they're constantly moving. They're not moving very quickly, but they are moving. And so today we're going to talk about the concept of continental drift and how we came to our modern day knowledge that we actually do have shifting plates on the planet. So we have to start first by talking about a scientist named Alfred Wegener, and he first proposed the idea of continental drift in 1912. So he said that 250 million years ago, there was a supercontinent called Pangaea. Now, we know that there are several continents today, so North America, South America, Africa, Australia, but he was proposing that a long time ago, all of the continents were actually merged together into one large continent. And this is what he predicted that it looked like. So again, instead of being separate, like we know on the modern day globe, he was saying that all the continents were together in one large continent. He then proposed that Pangaea broke up into two separate continents known as Laurasia and Gondwanaland. And so this would have been in the Triassic period, about 200 million years ago. Pangaea starts to split apart, and then slowly both Laurasia and Gondwanaland moved away from one another. So eventually, Laurasia would split into modern-day Europe, Asia, and North America. And then Gondwanaland would split into South America, Africa, Australia, Antarctica, Madagascar, and India. So these are our modern continents as we know them today, split from these two larger continents that themselves were split from the original Pangaea. Okay. And here we have the movement. Again, this is over 200 million years ago, so a long, long time ago. So this was his theory. Remember, Alfred Wegener, he was the one that proposed this, and geologists were like, prove it. And he was like, okay, I've got these 4 forms of evidence. Here we go. So he had 4 forms of evidence to support his continental drift. And the first was puzzle pieces. So he said that the continents look like they could be part of a giant jigsaw puzzle. And if you've ever looked at the continents on the globe, you can see that they do look like they kind of fit together, right? So if you were to have pieces of the world map as a puzzle, you could kind of fit them in to make one large landmass. And there's kind of this idea in science that nature takes the path of least resistance. So the most simple explanation is probably the correct explanation. So being able to look at these large land masses and say, hey, it looks like they fit together as puzzle pieces, that was one of the major pieces of evidence he used to support his theory. His second piece of evidence was the distribution of fossils. So he found plant and animal fossils on the coastlines of different continents. So if we take a look at these different colored indications here, so each color indicates a different fossil that is found across different continents. So this little guy in orange is found in South America and Africa. The guy in red is Africa, India, Antarctica. These plants were found across Australia, Antarctica, India, Africa, and South America. And then this little lizard-looking dude, he was found in South America and Africa. So what does this mean? Finding fossils of these same organisms across different continents would be indication that at one time the continents were all together in this one large landmass. And why is that? So an example is a Mesosaurus. And again, these Mesosaurus fossils would be found across multiple continents in modern day continents. So we'd find them maybe in Africa and North America. Well, the organisms couldn't swim across the oceans, right? The oceans are very large. It would be very unlikely that the same species of the Mesosaurus would be able to live in two different continents and swim across an entire ocean to get to the other coastline. It just wouldn't make sense. And the fossils would have been found all over the world if they could swim such large distances and make it from continent to continent. Some critics did argue that animals could have walked across a land bridge, so maybe there was a bridge of land between two continents that just disappeared. But Wegener argued back that if there was a land bridge, wouldn't there be remnants of the land bridge? So if there's no remnants of it and there's no evidence of it, that means there's no land bridge. So the most likely explanation is that there used to be a supercontinent, and then as the continent broke apart, the remaining fossils got moved along with the continents. Right? That makes sense. His third piece of evidence was rock types and structures. So several mountain ranges end at one continent's edge and reappear at the edge of another continent. So what does this imply? Well, it implies that the continents were once connected. So again, it's a pretty simple idea, but it's probably the most likely. And we do know that this is true today, but back in 1912, before the theory of plate tectonics, people were like, what, this is crazy. But he was, providing these very simplistic, but very compelling pieces of evidence for Pangaea. And then his fourth piece of evidence was ancient climates. So there were evidence of glacial sheets found in Africa, South America, and other areas. And these sheets showed that around 200 to 300 million years ago, ice covered these areas. So if we think about the climate of Africa, Africa typically has warmer climates. You're not going to find ice sheets in Africa, right? So right now in modern day, Africa is close to the equator. And we know from Unit 1 that there's large amounts of radiation from the sun hitting the equator pretty much all year round. And that means it's just too warm there for there to be ice sheets. So if the continents had always been at their present locations, it would never be cold enough in Africa for there to ever have been glacial ice sheets. So this is evidence that at one point Africa was closer to the poles, it was a colder climate, and there was ice present. So in Pangaea, these areas, again, they were close to the poles, able to be cold, able to have these ice sheets, and then over millions of years, the continents spread apart. Africa moved closer to the equator, and it's got a warmer climate today. They also found coal in Antarctica, and what is the significance of this? Well, coal is actually a byproduct of the decomposition and compaction of organic material. And so that was evidence that there would have had to have been a forest that grew there. And if you think about Antarctica, Antarctica is very cold. So this would indicate for there to have been a forest there, it would have had to have been warm at some point. And at the present location, that would be impossible. So at some point, Antarctica would have been where it's warmer, so closer to the equator. So forests could grow and then eventually decay and be compacted into coal. But geologists rejected Wegener's hypothesis. They were like, no, this is crazy. And part of the reason why his hypothesis wasn't, and his concept of continental drift wasn't accepted, is because he really just couldn't explain how the continents were moving. So how do the continents move away from one another? And we are going to dive into that next week. So we are going to learn exactly how the continents are moving and why they move as well. So his evidence was correct. He just couldn't explain how the continents moved. He thought that the continents just floated along the tops of the oceans, and we know today that's not true. Okay, but because he didn't have evidence to support his theory and actually show how the continents could move, geologists just typically rejected it. But we do have a new hope. So technology gets us better info on the ocean floor, earthquakes, and the planet's magnetic field, which led us to the theory of plate tectonics in 1968. So it took 56 years to actually come up with a new accepted theory. And part of the technology that we've used to help us with the theory of plate tectonics is sonar. And this is just bouncing radio waves off the ocean floor, and it will basically give scientists kind of an image of what the ocean floor looks like, and they can easier study continental and oceanic crust. So just something to be aware of, continental drift proposed by Alfred Wegener. There's 4 pieces of evidence we have to know about, and it wasn't accepted because he couldn't explain how the continents were actually moving. So this is going to be our segue into our lessons for next week, when we actually talk about and how we discover how the continents are moving. So this is going to be our jumping off point for next week. But until then, this is all that I have for you guys today. So you guys can go back and continue with your lesson. And if you have any questions, make sure you let me know.